Tractate Avodah Zarah discusses the laws and prohibitions of idolatry and the worship of false deities. Chapter 1 begins the discussion of these laws. The first Mishnah says, if somebody worships an idol during the 3 days preceding the idol worshipper's holiday, it's forbidden to do business with them, lend them items or money, borrow items or money, repay a debt, or accept payment for a debt. The logic is that by doing so, this close to the holiday, it'll cause the man to praise and worship his idol, which is problematic. Others say that it would be permissible to accept payment, as this would distress the man. Others disagree, saying although he's distressed now, he no longer has a debt, so he'll be happy later. Additionally, it is worth noting that the idolatry discussed in this tractate refers to the worship of actual pagan idols in ancient Roman Babylonia, things like Mercury or Dagon or otherwise. So many of these laws have little practical application nowadays. The Gemara says there's debate as to the usage of wording in the Mishnah based on reference to particular verses. Related, it said that when Mashiach comes, God will take a Torah scroll and declare, whoever occupied themselves with it shall have its reward. The other nations of the world will then enter in disarray, and God will put them in order so he could speak to them one at a time. The Roman Empire will speak first, as they are prestigious, and they will tell God they established marketplaces and bathhouses. They acquired lots of gold and silver, and they'll try to argue they did it for the Jewish people so they could learn Torah, but God will say it was all for themselves and their hedonism, and they'll leave. Then the Persian Empire will enter after the Romans, as they're the second to most prestigious, and they'll say they constructed bridges, conquered cities, and waged wars, and they'll argue that they did so the Jewish people could learn Torah, so God will say no, it was for themselves, and they'll leave. The Persian Empire had a bit of a better claim, as they helped build the temple, unlike the Romans. The other nations of the world will also try, as they have a better claim since they didn't subjugate the Jewish people. The Roman and Persian empires alone are specified, as they'll endure until Mashiach comes. It said the nations of the world will argue, as it wasn't fair. They were never offered the Torah in the first place properly, unlike by the Jewish people, where it was said that God held Mount Sinai over them as a threat to force them to accept the Torah. So God will counter-argue, saying that he offered them to follow the 7 Noahide laws, and many didn't follow that as it was. Some actually say the Noahide laws simply no longer apply, so there's no longer a reward. Rather, it's explained as it says that any non-Jewish person who learns Torah is considered to be like a Kohen Gadol, and they receive a reward like one who does something without being commanded to do so. Anyways, by Mashiach, the nations will argue that the Jewish people who also didn't fully observe all the mitzvahs, but God will testify that they did, along with the heaven and earth. As it said, those will cease to exist without the acceptance of Torah. And additionally, people of the nations of the world will testify that the Jewish people kept the Torah, as Nimrod will testify that Abraham didn't do idolatry, and Lavan will testify that Yaakov didn't do theft, and Potiphar's wife will testify that Yosef didn't commit adultery, and Nebuchadnezzar will testify that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't bow to an idol, and Daryavush will testify that Daniel didn't cease prayer, and many others. So the nations will argue they want a second chance to keep the Torah, so God will say, fine, keep the mitzvah of a sukkah, an easy mitzvah with no monetary cost. So everybody will do so by the holiday of Sukkot, but God will make the sun shine with blazing heat, so everybody amongst the nations will leave the sukkah and also kick it as they exit. It's explained that the heat is fair, as the normal Sukkot holiday can sometimes extend into the summer season, and also technically you're exempt from the sukkah if it's too uncomfortable, but the principal issue is that they kicked it as they left. It's also said that this is the one day ever that God will laugh. Others say the nations of the world will become partial converts and keep tefillin and tzitzis and whatnot, but will reject them once they see the difficulties of the war of Gog and Magog. It's said that this laughter is the one time he laughed about a creature. It's also said that during the first 3 hours of the day, God studies Torah. During the next 3, he judges the world and sees it deserves destruction, so he sits on the throne of mercy. During the next 3 hours, he provides sustenance for the world, for every creature, and for the final 3 hours he plays and laughs with the Leviathan, although there's a lot of commentary as to exactly what this is all in reference to. Others say since the destruction of the temple there is no laughter, so it's debated what God does in the fourth 3-hour period. Some say it's when he teaches children Torah, some say it's when he listens to the songs of the angels. There are many interpretations. There are many further analogies on the great importance of learning Torah. There are further points on all this. And it's said from a number of sources that God punishes his people in small increments, so they'll be worthy of the world to come. It's also said that God is only angry a single instant every day for 153,884th part of an hour, which was only known by Bilam. It discusses this exact time, which was already said at a few earlier times in other tractates, and it says one of the sages tried to use this time to curse a heretic, but he kept sleeping through it, so he realized that doing so was improper. Based on this, it said that a person should not pray the additional Musaf prayer during the first 3 hours of the day on Rosh Hashanah, as he might be judged poorly. This does not apply to the prayer of a congregation, as they have a lot of merit. There are other points on this. It said that all of the mitzvahs done will testify on their performance during the world to come. Others say the good deeds by Mashiach's coming will come and strike those that worshipped idols. And it's also said that the sin of the golden calf was only done so as to encourage people in the future to repent. There are further such points. It said that any mitzvah done will precede the person in the world to come, and any sin done will lead him to the day of judgment. And there are further points on the golden calf. Some say that without the golden calf, death would have been abolished. Others disagree. It said that there are 4 men who are considered to be dead: a poor man, a blind man, a person with Zarah leprosy, and a person without children. It expounds on related verses. There are additional teachings. It said that the evil inclination can be conquered through learning Torah and doing kindness and similar. Anyways, back to the prohibition against doing transactions with somebody who worships idols before their holiday. We said it was 3 days. It's not 30 days like are required for animals before offering them to the temple, as idolatrous offerings don't have strict laws of blemishes and whatnot like there are by the temple. Non-Jewish people bringing animal offerings to the temple in Jerusalem still have the requirements that it not be missing any limbs and it brings sources. These are additionally discussed. Anyways, the 3 days prior to the holiday, it debates if this is 3 full days prior or 3 days including the holiday. It debates this, giving a number of instances of actual ancient idolatrous Roman holidays called Calenda, Saturnalia, and Creatism, along with their dates. It said that it means 3 full days prior, not including the holiday. It also explains the reason behind the prohibition against making sales during this period. Some say it's so they don't receive profit and thereby praise their idol. Others say it's so as to not facilitate the actual service to the idol. There's a practical difference if the man already has an animal ready for its offering, as the second one would not be relevant then. It debates this from a number of sources and it cites some related incidents. Additionally, it said lending and borrowing is forbidden during these days. Lending is an issue for the above reasons, and borrowing is an issue. Some say that borrowing will lead to lending. Others say that this could still lead to the person praying to his idol. The same applies with borrowing money and collecting a debt. It cited all of these instances to show all of these individually are necessary. There are further points on this. It's actually a debate as to whether a person can collect debts prior to their holiday, although some say there's a difference and it would be allowed if it was a verbal loan. It cites a few additional rulings on other subjects, such as that it's held on Shabbos. You cannot hire workers, but it would be permitted to ask somebody for assistance. You have to do this vaguely without directly explicitly asking them. It gives other instances of held laws, like by laws of impurity and similar. New Mishnah, some say it's prohibited to do business dealings 3 days prior to their holiday, and also 3 days after. Others say it's allowed in the days after. The Gemara says, some say it's always forbidden on Sunday. What holiday this is referring to is questioned by the commentaries, and the consensus reached is that this, based on the unique wording, refers to the worship of a Babylonian sun god, an ancient pagan holiday that took place on Sundays, so this no longer applies. The difference between the opinion on the first Mishnah, which banned dealings 3 days prior, and this here refers to 3 days including the holiday. Others answer that the prior permitted business transactions, unlike here. Others say this is disagreeing with the opinion that in the diaspora the prohibition is only on the actual holiday. Others say the latter opinion is holding that there's a ban 1 day prior, like a different opinion. He'd also hold that selling old male horses during wartime is allowed. Others disagree. There's debate on various other subjects, including several points on laws of prayer. It's held that a person makes a personal prayer besides for all the pre-written words in the prayer of Shomea Tefillah during the Amidah, among others. New Mishnah. The following are the idol-worshipping holidays referenced so far, that business transactions are banned around. It's a few pagan holidays: Calenda, Saturnalia, and Creatism, the Genusia, day of the emperors, the emperor's birthday, and also the day of his passing. Others say this last one only counts if the emperor's possessions are burnt, as that's when idolatrous services were done. There are a few minor pagan holidays: the day of the shaving of their beards and their haircutting, the day of their returning from sea or release from prison, or making a wedding feast. There it's forbidden to do business dealings on that specific day with that specific man. The Gemara explains these ancient holidays, citing the dates in their source. They revolved around the winter solstice, and it says that tradition was passed from Adam seeing the first winter solstice. Some say it was tradition from him seeing the sunset for the first time, and he thought the world was being destroyed due to his sin. So he fasted and wept with Eve all night until the sun rose, and then he offered an ox with a single horn on its forehead. Anyways, regarding the holiday of Calenda, it was a Roman holiday, so it said that the prohibitions only applied to Roman citizens. There are further points upon the prohibition of partaking in such an idol worshipper's wedding. Even if the food is kosher and whatnot, it said that it would be permissible 12 months after the wedding. Creatism was a holiday that celebrated the day Rome seized their sovereignty, which occurred twice, once with Octavian against Cleopatra, and the other earlier from the Greeks. It said that the Romans allied with the Jewish people to defeat the Greeks, and kept their treaty for 26 years, but then betrayed them. It cites sources for this and discusses their harsh decrees, including the passing of Rebbe Yehuda ben Bava, who secretly passed rabbinical ordination to 5 students, and was then caught by the Romans, and stayed to give the others time to escape, and was impaled by 300 spears. The Great Sanhedrin also exiled themselves around this time, as there were too many murderers, so instead of having them all be held liable, they just went into exile. It discusses these dates further, including the concept that the world will be for 6,000 years, 2,000 of nothingness, 2,000 of Torah, and 2,000 of Mashiach, and it discusses opinions on how this is calculated. It also gives some guides on the calculation of the sabbatical year cycles. Therefore, the point on the calculation of dates for documents. The Genusia holiday for the emperor was said to be the day of inauguration of the emperor. It debates how this inauguration would work regarding the ascension, and it said that the emperor could appoint his son upon request. As Marcus Aurelius spoke to the sage Rabbi Avodah Hanasi, his friend, saying he wanted his son to rule after him, and also to grant Tiberius its freedom, but he could only do one of those. So Rabbi, as he typically did, would communicate with him in analogy or code, showed him the analogy of a man on the shoulders of another man. The top man handed a dove to the lower man, who let it go free. Marcus Aurelius took this to mean that he should appoint his son, and then have his son declare Tiberius as free. Another exchange they had, Marcus Aurelius confided to Rabbi Yehuda that some Roman dignitaries were persecuting him, so Rebbe plucked single radishes from a garden one at a time, and Marcus Aurelius took this to mean he should have them killed one at a time over a period. The reason their exchanges were so encoded and secretive was as the people of Rome wouldn't have been too thrilled with their relationship, so they kept it all very secretive. There's another incident where they had a whole conversation on advice for Aurelius's daughter, who had gotten into an adultery scandal, and they communicated by sending vegetables to each other. Marcus Aurelius would frequently send Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi sacks of crushed gold covered with wheat, but Rabbi refused it, saying he already had plenty of money, but Aurelius said it should be for all of his descendants. They would also meet in secret. Marcus Aurelius had a secret tunnel to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's house, and he'd bring 2 servants, both of which he'd have killed to maintain their secrecy. Aurelius wanted their meetings to be totally private. Once another sage, Reb Chanina Bar Chama, was there, and Aurelius got upset, so Rebbe said, "Don't worry, he's an angel." So Reb Chanina was sent out, and he saw the dead servant, and he didn't know what to do, if he should report it or not, so he just prayed and had the guy be resurrected. And Aurelius said that was neat, but still the meeting should be private. The 2 men were very close, and Aurelius would bring Rebbe food and offer to help the sage into his bed as a stool, but Rebbe refused, saying he didn't want to disrespect the throne. Marcus Aurelius also asked if he would enter the world to come, and Rebbe said yes, as the verse says that no remnant of the house of Asaph will enter, but that refers only to those that act like Asaph. There was another of such men within the Roman government, a non-Jewish man named Ketia Bar Shalom, who used his position to keep the Jewish people safe from the Caesar of that time, and for it was executed. But right before he was executed, he circumcised himself and said all of his possessions should go to the sage Rabbi Akiva, and a voice from heaven said that Ketia would enter the world to come. It gives instances of such other righteous non-Jewish men. Onkelos, the nephew of Titus, who converted to Judaism, so the Caesar sent some troops to arrest him, and Onkelos convinced them to convert to Judaism also, so more troops were sent, and he convinced them, and more were sent and were told to not speak to him, and as he was being arrested, he placed his hand on the mezuzah, so the soldiers asked what he was doing, so he explained how God guards the Jewish people, and they were impressed and also converted. It also brings the verse regarding Rivka. As she was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav, it says 2 nations are in your womb. And some read the word for nations as the similar word for proud ones, reference to their respective descendants, the 2 righteous men, Marcus Aurelius and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Anyways, it also discusses whether the burning of the king's possessions upon his death is an idolatrous ceremony. It also explains the idolatrous hair-cutting festival as sharing the bread and also cutting the hair. Another ancient Roman holiday, every 70 years they would have a healthy man representing Esav, right atop a lame one representing Yaakov, and the upper man would dress like Adam, and he would wear the flayed face of the sage Rabbi Yishmael, and they would declare that their empire had defeated Yaakov. This was not mentioned earlier as it wasn't a yearly holiday. Those were the Roman holidays. There were also some pagan Persian holidays called Muharrenkai, Aknesei, Bachnunei, and the 10th of Adar. It lists the locations of several ancient pagan temples. New Mishnah. If a city has an idolatrous service within, you can do business outside. If it has an idolatrous service outside, you can do business within. If there's a pagan holiday going on inside a city, the road within cannot be used if it's only to the city. It can be used if it goes through the city. The Gemara gives instances of such cities. It says there was no concern here, similar to a particular case of a pot of a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person cooking on the same stove. Some say this means there's no concern of the non-Jewish men dumping non-kosher meat into the Jewish person's pot, so too there's no concern about receiving idolatrous money. Others say it means there's no concern of doing business on the holiday. Others say it means the same way there's no concern of non-kosher fluids from the pot splashing into the other, so too there's no concern of commerce in the days before the holiday. The issue with using the road towards the city is that it'll look like you're attending the idolatrous holiday. There are many similar rulings, like to not bend down to pick up coins in front of an idol and similar. There are further points, not to drink water from rivers or ponds with your mouth or hand, as you might swallow a leech. If somebody does so on a Shabbos, there are medicinal matters that are permitted to be performed. It also says a person should not drink water at night due to the demon Shabriri, and it explains how to avoid this. New Mishnah: if there's a city with an idolatrous holiday where some shops are decorated and some are not, the decorated shops are prohibited and the undecorated ones are permitted. The Gemara says this applies to decorations of rose or myrtle that are for the idol, as you'd be benefiting from the smell. It's debated if fruit decorations are permitted. It debates whether purchases made can benefit an idol, as the source says buying items at a pagan fair is allowed, but that's explained to be allowed if there's no idol tax, like a purchase from a householder. It's also said that an animal bought from a pagan fair should have its hamstrings cut. This cannot be done by a consecrated animal, which can't be injured, so it's just left and made to starve. It said animals, slaves, and maidservants can be purchased from an idolatrous fair. It debates if this refers to Jewish or non-Jewish slave. It says both are allowed. There are later points. New Mishnah: some things forbidden to sell to a person who worships idols, things used for a variety of idolatrous ceremonies, some particular fruits with their stems attached, frankincense, and a white rooster. Some say a white rooster can be sold amongst other roosters, and if it's sold alone, its toe can be clipped, so that way it won't be used as an offering. The above listed can be sold if they're unspecified. Some also add to the list fine date palm, chatzav, and niklas, which will be defined. The Gemara defines these fruits and items. In regards to selling the white rooster, it's debated if it can be sold if the man requests specifically the white rooster, or if it cannot even be sold unspecified by itself. It debates this in regards to somebody asking for specifically a mutilated white rooster, or if somebody asks for a white rooster but is accepting other colors too. So he's possibly trying to trick people to get the white rooster for idolatry. It's unresolved. It debates definition on the remaining fruits. New Mishnah: if the custom of a location is to sell small livestock to idol worshippers, it's permitted, otherwise not. It's never allowed to sell an idol worshipper large livestock of any sort, as will be explained. There's a concern the animals will be worked on Shabbos. Others say it's allowed if it's a maimed animal, and others allow a horse. The Gemara explains a conflicting source regarding the smaller animals, as apparently back in those days there was a serious concern that people would do bestiality, so selling animals, if such was a concern, was forbidden. Although it's dependent on the region, so some people would be willing to, but wouldn't because they didn't want to sterilize the animal. It explains the issue with large animals, being that it could be that the animal would be worked on Shabbos, but perhaps not, as they're not actually borrowing it, they're owning it. So others explain the issue is the purchase might take place close to Shabbos, and they'll test the animal to see if it behaves, and the seller will call it and accidentally cause it to walk on Shabbos while carrying. It further discusses these issues. It also qualifies permissibility of selling land during the sabbatical year and further on animal sales. It's also said that it's forbidden to sell weapons to an idol worshipper or to a Jewish robber who's a sneak thief and therefore might kill with them. It's debated if selling shields is permissible. The issue would be that shields too can be used as a weapon, but it's ruled that selling them shields is permissible. Some say it's an issue to sell particular iron used for making weapons to them. Others say it's allowed to sell to the Persians who defended the Jewish people. The remaining opinions are clarified, and it's held that the sale of horses is allowed to an idol worshipper. Regarding a fattened ox, which would not be able to work on Shabbos, it's debated whether it's allowed to be sold depending on the opinion, as it could become thin and it's ready for slaughter. This is debated. New Mishnah: selling idol worshippers bears or lions or anything that could injure people is prohibited, along with building a tiered court building, which were used for specifically capital punishment, building a stadium arena or a platform that was used for execution. Building them altars and bathhouses is allowed, but not the part of the structure that would have the idol placed within. The Gemara says this would imply, like the opinion that selling large, non-domesticated animals that are not dangerous would be allowed. This is debated and it's refuted. It argues this further from various sources, and it also explains the various forbidden structures. It cites an incident when Rabbi Eliezer was being tried in an idolatrous court and was acquitted, and the judge swore by the name of an idol, which upset the sage greatly. It cites many related teachings and says that there was this one man who it said had cohabited with every single harlot in the world, and one told him that he'd never be forgiven for this, so he went away and begged forgiveness from God and cried until he passed away, and it was declared from heaven that he would go to the world to come. Another story: two sages were traveling and they reached a fork in the road, one to an idolatrous temple and one to a brothel, and they decided to travel by the brothel so as to have the opportunity to subdue their evil inclination. It also cites the Romans' persecution of a few sages, one of which was sentenced, but the messenger was intercepted by Eliyahu the prophet and was flung 400 parseas away. A different sage was similarly tried by the Romans, and he was burnt to death as he used to say God's name according to its letters to teach himself in public. His wife was also executed, as she didn't stop him from doing this. His daughter was sentenced to live amongst the harlots, as she was walking in Rome and she overheard somebody talking about how beautiful her steps were, so she started walking very particularly. It said when they were sentenced, the three of them all quoted verses acknowledging God's judgment. It further expounds on this whole incident. One sage, Rabbi Meir, his wife was related to the daughter who was sentenced to live among the harlots. So Rabbi Meir went to go rescue her and gave the guard a coin along with the prayer, Elokad de Meir Anini, God of Meir, answer me, which he showed protected him, and he rescued his sister-in-law. The guard was arrested and sentenced to be hung, so he said the prayer and he was unable to be hung. So they asked who this Rabbi Meir was, and he told them, so Rabbi Meir hid in a brothel, and Eliyahu Hanavi appeared like a woman embracing him, so the Roman soldiers thought this wasn't him, and Rabbi Meir escaped to Babylonia. Anyways, it said that going to a stadium or to see conjurers or snake charmers is frivolity and leads to a neglect of Torah. It said going to a gladiator match would be allowed, as by shouting you can participate and lead to a gladiator being spared, and also if there was a Jewish slave in the arena, you'd be able to testify to his death. Some say there were issues with going to circuses or theaters, as there were idolatrous practices or possibly a suspicion of such. It quotes many related verses on the negativity of scoffing and jests and also arrogance, and commending those who don't waste time with theaters and circuses. It expounds on many verses relating the importance of Torah study. There are many further of such teachings. Regarding building the place for an idol, that's not allowed, but the payment for the service is not prohibited. Some hold this applies even to payment for the prohibited building of an idol, even if he completed the idol, as the act of striking the final blow, which is what gives it the status of an idol, isn't given worth greater than the minimum value of a prota. This opinion holds that an employee's payment is accrued across his entire service, not all at once at the end. New Mishnah. Some say we don't make ornaments for idols like chokers or rings or nose rings. Some say it's allowed to pay. Some say we don't sell plants to idol worshippers if they're attached to the ground. Detached produce is allowed. Others say attached produce is allowed if it'll be detached. The Gemara discusses these points and related prohibitions. It discusses prohibitions on staring at women, and it discusses the angel of death, who it says stands above the sick with an unsheathed sword held above him. When the sick man sees the angel, he opens his mouth and a drop of poison falls off the sword into his mouth, causing him to die and his body to rot. It cites further issues on staring at women, like their clothing. The remaining points are qualified. New Mishnah. Renting houses to idol worshippers is forbidden in Israel, and also fields. Only houses can be rented in Syria. Both are allowed outside of Israel. Others say renting houses alone is allowed within Israel. In Syria, selling houses and renting fields is allowed, and outside both can be sold. Even when renting is allowed, it's not allowed for living quarters, as the issue here is that they'll bring idols into the house, which is not allowed. Renting a bathhouse is never allowed, as it'll be under the name of the Jewish owner, which could cause issues with the usage on Shabbos. The Gemara explains there's no issue with removing the mezuzah on the house, which means renting the field has the two prohibitions of giving away land within Israel and giving up the Ma'aser tithe. The debate by Surya and otherwise is a debate on the status based on the conquering by King David. It holds like the latter opinion that renting houses within Israel is allowed, selling houses and renting fields in Syria is allowed, and selling both is allowed outside of Israel. This applies with the creation of neighborhoods of idol worshippers, which is 3 or more people. There's no concern about them selling their property further. The remaining points are qualified. It discusses issues with non-Jewish people working for Jewish people on a field on Shabbos, and it's unresolved what the status is if there's an unspecified deal for the Jewish man to work on the weekday and the non-Jewish man to work on Shabbos as sharecroppers. And that's the end of chapter 1.